Welcome to Dealing with Grief and Reintegration during COVID-19, brought to you by Good Grief Bereavement Healing Services, a registered charity. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. Good Grief Bereavement Healing Services specializes in matching grieving adults with support options tailored to their unique situation. Whether it's one-on-one counseling, workshops, support groups, or our Bereavement Buddies program, we help individuals find what works for them. I'm especially proud and we're pleased to let you know we've been doing well during this COVID times. Our transition's going well. Our counselors are taking virtual appointments. Our groups are online. And we're having more and more events like this one. Just a few housekeeping notes. I did mention that we are recording. And hand in hand with recording comes muting. So you may have noticed you were muted. If you unmute yourself, even if you cough, you will show up in our recording, which is fine with us. Like an organic presentation is fine, but I just wanted to let you know ahead of time. So please do put your questions and comments in the chat. We're going to address them. We'll see how it goes. We'll address them as they come up or at the end. We'll just sort of go with the flow and see what time allows for. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our counselors to you, our panel of experts, and also our moderator. If it looks like I'm reading, I am. They have so many amazing qualifications. I have to read it to get it right. So I'm going to start, it's alphabetical order, with Shirley Nussbaum. And Shirley is a registered psychotherapist and a registered hypnotherapist. She graduated from York University with an honors BA in psychology and received her certification in psychology from the Transformational Arts College. Shirley, who has been practicing for 11 years, deals with many life issues, including grief, addiction, anxiety, and depression. One of Shirley's primary goals as a therapist is to help people figure out what's holding them back from living their best possible life and assist them in creating positive change. Sari Shakovich. Sari is a registered social worker who specializes in anxiety, depression, infertility, reproductive loss, crisis intervention, and self-esteem. She has undergraduate degrees in both psychology and social work, as well as a graduate degree in educational counseling psychology and special education. Sari also received extensive training in both cognitive behavioral therapy and infertility counseling. As a counselor and social worker for more than 20 years, Sari helps clients identify where they are struggling and to formulate personal and realistic goals for change. Lisa Toy is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, expressive arts therapist, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing practitioner. She has worked in pediatric and adult health, mental health, and palliative care agency settings for over a decade, and in private practice for nearly a decade, specializing in palliative grief and complex trauma work with children, youth, and adults. Lisa has taught extensively, authored several book chapters and online resources on grief, and currently co-teaches in the Sick Kids Sarana Institute's Mindfulness and Compassion in Healthcare and End-of-Life Certificate Program. Lisa is passionate about supporting children, youth, adults, and families living through adversity, grief, and trauma to grow and give a voice to their experiences through mindful, whole body awareness, creativity, art making, and the natural world. Please join me in welcoming them. Our moderator today is Eileen Jad, co-founder of Good Grief Bereavement Healing Services. Eileen has been working for community service organizations in Toronto, both professionally and on a volunteer basis, for over 25 years, since getting her master's degree in communal service at Brandeis University in Boston. She also obtained a social work degree from York University here in Toronto. Prompted by the sudden death of her brother-in-law, Eileen began her new role as a bereavement educator. Having obtained her certificate in bereavement education from the University of Toronto's Social Work Continuing Education Department, Eileen has been focusing her skills in assisting the underserved grief-stricken population of the Greater Toronto Area. And so now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and sister, Eileen.
I don't know if anyone can remember back to January in at the beginning of the year, everything seemed quite normal, right? We were coming off the holidays, coming off breaks, people were coming back to work, back to school, and nobody was really paying attention that this other virus was happening on the other side of the world. And then it came over here and everything changed really, really quickly. And suddenly the virus had a name, it's COVID-19. And it also became known as a pandemic. And then this huge learning curve of what we had to do to flatten the curve. So, we have to learn how to wash our hands properly. Don't touch your face, wear a mask, going grocery shopping once a week, all these different things we had to get used to. And then people were sent home. We had this social isolation. Nobody was working in their offices. Suddenly there's homeschooling, different things we had to do. But the biggest toll for COVID-19 has been among our most vulnerable, and that's our elderly and people with compromised immune systems. And with the rise in the number of deaths, there was also an obvious rise in the number of grievers as well. That's grievers without access to usual supports because we're on lockdown and social isolation. So today we'll discuss the experience of grievers and their unique challenges. Here we are 3 months later, we're opening up with all our fears, our unknowns, and pent-up grief. So we'll hear from our counselors on what they see from their clients and how we can deal with some of our new feelings. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about comparisons. So Shirley, I know we've discussed before how many people have felt like they've lost, rites of passage. How does that compare to grief after someone's passed away?
Okay, interestingly enough, the reason I started thinking about this is because one of my clients actually started all those graduation signs out there because her children and a lot of people that she knew were really, really upset about the loss of prom, about the loss of graduation, about not seeing their friends. And sometimes we forget how deeply, teenagers, young people feel things, right? And I was thinking about the fact that, truthfully, when a person dies, the biggest fear anybody has in life is death. And on top of that, we have the fear of change and the fear of uncertainty, right? And COVID-19 created all these fears. We woke up every morning to how many people died. We didn't know where we could go, how we could go, and with no end in sight. So everybody's obviously, all their deepest fears are being triggered here. And there's that loss, when someone passes away, you grieve that loss that that person died, but you also have to grieve the loss of what happens to you personally, the change, right? We don't know, how is my life going to change now? And it becomes very uncertain when you lose that close person, that person that would have supported you through transitions, just through daily life. And I think the same thing happened for the young people. All of a sudden they lost graduation, they lost prom, they lost maybe being called to the bar, they lost rituals like their bar bat mitzvah, like their confirmations. They lost the friends and the people that would help them through these times. So you're graduating from high school and you're afraid of what's going to happen next, right? Fear of going on to a different school or going on to a job. And normally we have those rituals that mark the change from high school to university. You have those people that go with you, that support you, make you feel less scared, more comfortable, that you can sort of go through it with, right? And all that is gone now.
Okay,
Now you're in isolation. Now you're alone with your thoughts. Now you're alone with your fears. And you've just lost that support system. And in a way, you have to grieve that, like you have to grieve the loss of a person. You're losing so much. And I
yes.
don't,
Thank you, Shirley. We are going to talk a little bit more about loss of rituals in a little bit. So I'm going to stop you there. That is really interesting to see how similar it is, some of these different loss of rites of passage. But now I'm going to ask Lisa, um, what about isolation and bereavement life? Are they similar? Do we have similar feelings when being isolated and when you're grieving?
I think it's probably really different for different people, but in thinking about this question, I was really mindful of one of my clients who said that when lockdown started in our part of the world, she had a really profound experience of wanting to say to her friends, like, now you understand what it's like for me. This is always how my grief has been. even though I'm 2 years out from the death that happened in my world, I've been experiencing isolation. I've been experiencing being home alone all the time and kind of put on my own resources and needing to deal with myself in a new way. And for her, it felt very, because she, like so many grievers, have a profound experience of disconnection from other people who haven't gone through that kind of grief. She really had a moment of like, now maybe people understand what this feels like for me. Maybe now I will have the companionship, even though we're physically distant, in this experience. I think one of the other things that I've been aware of with so many of my clients who are grieving is that this can feel quite comforting. I think that because it's familiar in a way, I think that how people respond in the pandemic conditions and in these conditions of isolation has a lot to do, in part whether we're introverted or extroverted. And this is like, for some introverts, fantastic. I think it also has a lot to do with our attachment style and what feels safe in the world and what doesn't feel safe in the world. And for people for whom being in a relationship is challenging, it's fraught, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of energy, it doesn't feel safe. And, that's a lot of us based on, there are lots and lots and lots of us. 50% of the population has an insecure attachment style. But I think that kind of cocooning into ourselves can feel really natural. Not always good. There might be parts of us that don't enjoy it. And there might be parts of us that are just like, thank you for relieving me of the social obligations and the energy and the work that I have to put into being out in the world all the time. And I certainly have some people for whom coming into this cocoon of time with themselves has been an incredible reconnection inside, a way to really have the space and the time to listen, to reconnect, to care for themselves, to do the things that they didn't have time to do, has provided a kind of a recalibration of how they want to be in the world in ways that I think have been really beautiful. And I think that a bit of that, I think for me, I would think that it doesn't have so much to do with whether you're grieving or not, as about who you were before you came into your grief and into
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question for Sari. Thank you. Sari, we were talking earlier about everyone being concerned about going back to the way things were and reintegrating. And how is that a similar feeling or different to life not going back to the way it was for grievers?
Let me start with part of why I think COVID has been so hard emotionally for so many people is because, and it's taken quite a toll and quite a hit on mental health, is because it came on suddenly and really without the opportunity for any of us to prepare. And I see that a lot, like when we're comparing it to the grieving process, often deaths come on suddenly, people pass away suddenly, but even for deaths that kind of were foreseen, the common theme between going back out of COVID versus going back versus the grief rather is people not having any control over what awaits them. And I think, I see that as a common theme in a lot of the work that I do in my practice, but we don't know what awaits us when we come out of COVID. We don't know what the environment's going to be like. We don't know what our family health is going to be like. We don't know who's going to have a job. We don't know what kind of state or mental health we will be in, our children, our loved ones. And I think people who are grieving, especially during this time, really don't, until you're in it, you don't know what to expect. And I think it's the feeling of limbo or the feeling of being out of control that are similar in the two. And I'm hearing that across the board in my practice from clients who are grieving, and clients who are going through other kinds of changes. It's a common thread. And I fear that the longer we're in isolation, the harder it's going to be. So I personally feel like there needs to be some kind of balance between opening up and taking into account the mental health of everybody, the grievers, but also, people who are just experiencing isolation, even those who say they like it. I think even they will have an emotional toll eventually. But I think we have to find a balance, and it shouldn't just be about the epidemiology. It has to be also about the whole person. I'm a big advocate of that. And so that's the similarity I see between the two, is just not knowing what to expect and having to figure out how to adapt, right? Like it's the new normal and we have no clue how to start.
So that's a perfect segue again into talking about rituals. So everyone knows that all the rituals that we've had with funerals being restricted to the number of people, memorial services not taking place, or taking place via Zoom and then Zoom not working, all kinds of things have happened. And usually when people are grieving, they can rely on some of these rituals. So now that we're going to reintegrate, Sari, what do you think? How can we implement some rituals? You know, how do you feel about that? Can we do some of the things we didn't do before?
I'm a very big advocate in my practice and in life about putting myself, my family, into situations that make us uncomfortable. I think anxiety is huge across the board in many populations, including the grieving population, but everywhere. And I think we have to wait till we feel comfortable. Like, I think one of the things is there's no designated amount of time that is appropriate, or that we should be told is the right way to do things or the right time to do things. I think that needs to come from within. But I also think that we have to do it. And I think if we don't, or if we kind of don't go ahead with those rituals and we feel stuck, that's when we need to seek help. But I don't think there should be necessarily what's considered right or wrong. I think that's very like judgmental. And I caution clients to not let others tell them what the right time is. I want them to be able to figure that out. And if then they feel like they are having trouble doing it, then they can seek help. But very much, yes, I'm very much an advocate of jumping back. You know, what is it, getting back on the horse, whatever that expression is.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa, do you have something, what do you think about rituals and implementing rituals once we open back up?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Sari that I think it's not about having a specific time frame, that I feel like in my practice, I'm always working to support people around, apology for any train noises you can hear, a sense of permission around their own process and what they need and what time and how that looks. I think there's a way in which some of these rituals are community rituals, and we want to be accountable, creating a space for, like, as being a family member or the special person in the life of the person who died, being able to create space for community to come together, at the same time being, listening to what we need to do. I have heard lots of variations on what people have done during the time of the pandemic. Lots of people have gone ahead with online memorials and rituals and celebrations that have been, like, really profoundly beautiful and moving and apt and reasonably complete in a way that I think is great. And some people have done kind of a hybrid. We're going to do something now and then something later. And I'm aware of a lot of people who have, as we begin to open up, started having like backyard distance gatherings in lieu of the big memorial celebration that might happen. So I feel like it's happening in all kinds of different ways. And so listening into what needs to happen in response to that, what further needs to happen.
And Shirley, maybe you want to weigh in. What do you think? Do you think implementing any of these rituals long after the death would reignite the grief? Is there such a thing?
Well, you know what? I think obviously everybody is individual and deals with grief differently, but grief is not linear, right? It doesn't matter whether, it's COVID-19 or it's just, a death or any kind of a grief that happens in regular times. We go through all kinds of feelings. We might be feeling really sad and then angry and then nothing and thinking we're getting on, and then something small can trigger us. It could be a TV commercial. It could be maybe seeing, maybe your parent has died and you run into an old friend who maybe didn't even know about the death and they ask you, and then that brings it up. I think that at any time, whether it's COVID time or normal time, you can have grief reignited at any moment, and that's okay. I think that that just means that there's a part of us that still needs to be grieving. And it's a good thing that we should allow ourselves to feel that emotion and to bring it up and to feel it and deal with it. Because I do believe that acknowledging our grief helps it to melt away, helps us to feel better, and helps us to feel connected to the person we've lost in some ways, right? So yeah, it might reignite grief, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
I agree with you. I like that perspective. Like if we acknowledge it, we can deal with it. Um, maybe it had to be put on the back burner a little bit, and now maybe there's a different way of
Hmm.
expressing our mourning. Um, moving on to the next question. Um, for any one of you can start, maybe Lisa this time, whatever. But I'm wondering, as grievers, what are some of the fears and things to watch out for as we emerge from isolation? Like, are there any triggers that grievers should be aware of? Um, what are people seeing for the first time after loss? Or, I'll put it out there like that. Lisa, maybe you want to start us off.
Yeah. So, the panel is speaking about the impacts of COVID-19, but I'm also very conscious of the larger global or, North American situation on other issues that are happening around Black Lives Matter, around, looking at systemic racism in our communities, around looking at violence in police forces, around looking at incredible corruption in the government just down south to us. I think that there are so many enervating, anxiety-inducing, fearful things happen. All this against the backdrop of global warming, right? So there's so much happening. I feel like um, Sari mentioned this earlier. Coming out of this time, I think we are all really sensitized. And so we need to be very careful and be watching ourselves and our needs as we kind of re-enter and just being really sensitive to the triggers that might arise and how we're responding and taking care of those along the way.
Thank you. Shirley, do you have, or Sari, either one of you want to add something?
I was just, in talking to a lot of people as they're starting to go out, or if they were working in an office and maybe there was only one or two essential people there, and more people are coming in, people are telling me they're looking at others like almost like they're evil. Like the first question is, oh my God, are they sick? What's going to happen? And our fears are coming up. So I think that just to have the awareness that we have to sort of when we catch that thought process, to shift our perspective a little bit to a non-fear perspective, to reminding ourselves that it's okay and not everybody, has corona. Not because I think the way people are talking about it, it's become more than corona. It's become an evil. There's been so much fear around it. So I think sometimes we just have to catch our thoughts and remind ourselves that, we're okay, we're safe. Not everybody is carrying it, and not to be looking at everybody as, the devil kind of thing.
Right, right.
And I'm hearing about this all the time. Oh my God, we're going to go out there. Oh my God, more people are around, and they're so afraid. So to me, when we can catch our thoughts and change our perspective, you change your perspective, you change your life. So it's not healthy to walk around in fear. And we just have to remind ourselves that we are actually safe. Everything is okay. And, when we have to deal with something, we will deal with it, but we don't have to be terrified of everybody and everything we see.
Very
'Cause
good point.
not,
Very good point. Be compassionate and not be as fearful. Sari, do you have any comments about getting back to the same place in our relationships and fear of that not happening? Or
It's interesting because I interpreted this question a little differently. I
okay,
interpreted it more as when we come out of Corona and we're having to face um, people that we haven't necessarily seen before we were grieving.
Mm.
How do we deal with that? So I was thinking about it from a slightly different perspective. I was thinking about more I often practice with my clients when they're unsure how to handle a situation. We do a lot of role play. We do some rehearsing because sometimes you're caught off guard when you see somebody and they say something to you, whether it's COVID or not, whether anything relating to somebody in your life passing, and you don't necessarily know how to handle it, especially when you're caught off guard. So
Mhm.
we can practice something that we would say. But I also tell clients that it's okay to not always be okay, and that you're going to have triggers and we can't always anticipate them. When we're able to catch them, like Shirley said, maybe we can, kind of halt it before it gets away with us. but sometimes it's okay to just feel it and allow ourselves not to be perfect for not being kind of on all the time or okay all the time, right? So if somebody is feeling that it's taking over too much emotionally, I work with them to say, okay, let's give ourselves, 15 minutes a day to scream and cry and deal with it, and then the rest of the day we have to work, we have to be a parent, we have to be a partner, we have to be a friend, whatever it is. That's an extreme situation. I'm talking more about coming out and seeing people post or throughout grief, but post COVID, and having to feel that there's almost an expectation that we're good and we're expected to be good. And I think that's not realistic.
And we shouldn't be advocating for that either. People should understand that that we're all human, and this is, and grief takes a long time. And just because you're seeing me for the, go ahead.
I think sometimes we're the hardest on ourselves.
Of course.
Right? Like we think we should be a certain way because maybe that's what it's expected of us, or we think it's expected of us. Right. And I don't necessarily think that's accurate, but I think if that's our perception, that's true to us, right?
That's true. That's true.
Right.
Okay, as our last question, I want to end on a sort of more uplifting note, but like it's hard to imagine, but in bad times, sometimes, that it's bad, but usually there's something that can be learned. And I'm just wondering what opportunities for growth and reflection as grievers emerge from isolation, what do you think the opportunities are? Shirley, you want to start us off, or?
I guess for me, I think we're always running around, and it gave us a chance to kind of learn how to be comfortable with our own selves and our own thoughts. I think a lot of people are workaholics or exerciseaholics. We had so many different coping skills, and we ran from ourselves. So I think it was a great chance to um, get quiet, maybe get to know ourselves a little bit, get to know our families a little bit, to have a little bit of calm in our life. And maybe we can take that with us, that we don't have to be doing all the time, that we can just be, and that's okay. And we don't have to be perfect. We don't, like she was saying, it's okay, just to allow yourself time to relax and be, and without any pressure to do anything and be, on all the time. And
That's a wonderful lesson, actually. I love that. No pressure. Sari, what are your thoughts on opportunities for growth?
I like to have clients focus on goals and aspirations post grief or during grief. And I read somewhere like the expression grief, even the fact that you're still grieving when somebody passes I'm paraphrasing, is an indication that obviously love still exists after. And I like to use that as, sorry, I paraphrased it. I probably just killed it, but I'll try and find the quote. I like to use that kind of as a springboard toward doing something positive. I deal a lot with infertility. I deal a lot with clients who have lost babies or in that scenario. And one of the things that they do, which they find extremely cathartic, is they actually write letters. Sometimes as a couple, sometimes if they're single parents, same-sex couple, they do it individually or together. They write a letter to that child with what they are missing. It's with what they loved about them. It brings that love almost to something visual that they can look at, that they can refer to. And the process of doing this, although very difficult in the moment, has been described to me and explained that it's almost cathartic, it's freeing, it's unburdening. It allows me to kind of have that closure. So that's like an activity I do with clients with that kind of loss. There are so many ways that we can use a loss to kind of bring that out. But that's what I wanted to bring forward because it's extremely effective.
Thank you.
I've had some clients even bury them, in their backyard. Like it's very beautiful, some of what we can do.
Thank you. That is really beautiful, and it would be very helpful to many people, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you have any lessons that you think we can impart to other people that have come out of this COVID-19 craziness?
Yeah, I feel like something that COVID-19 and death have in common is that hopefully they teach us about what matters in life, and that this period of pause has opened up that opportunity for reflection, both on an individual basis in the way that Shirley was talking about, like how do we want to slow down, how do we want to be with ourselves, how to keep ourselves healthy and connected, how do we express love in the world, but also something about the pandemic that I think is different than grief is that grief often feels so isolating. And hopefully in the pandemic, the experiences that we're, as a planet in this together, that calls out something about not only how do we take care of ourselves, maybe what are the opportunities for collective action to give back to other people? How do I want to use my resources and my privileges and my capacities to be of service in my own life to nourish myself, the people that I love who are close to me, but also the many, 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 many people out there who are suffering so deeply and in so many ways. I hope that that is a lesson that people can take out of this time.
Wow, that is beautifully said. Just beautiful. Yes, I hope we can all learn from that.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the panelists and the moderator. So thank you, Eileen, Shirley, Sari, and Lisa. Your comments and your insights. I took some notes. Some of those will really be with me for quite some time. Thanks to all the participants. I really appreciate your time and your attention. There's so many things taking place online these days. I'm really glad you could be here with us. Also, I want to remind you that Good Grief is here to help. Our counselors are taking virtual appointments, and we can continue the conversation on our forum. We have a discussion board on the Good Grief website, and also you can sign up for updates by going to the Good Grief website and click Get Started. Don't be afraid of getting started. You can just sign up for an email, and then you'll get updates on all the events and other activities we have going on. And I'll just end by letting you know about something exciting we have going on July 30th. That's in celebration of International Friendship Day. It's going to be at 7:30 p.m. And I mention that because you will remember 7:30 on 7:30. And so stay tuned for more details on that. You'll find it on Eventbrite or, like I said, if you sign up for our updates. So thanks again to our panelists, our moderator, and for everyone attending. Have a good afternoon.